Hey, welcome to this video on exporting models from Maya into Unity. I have a workflow that handles things like correct proportion and scale, units of measurement, making a good UV snapshot, and making sure your export settings on your FBX file will work in both Unity and the Quixel texturing suite. All right, so why don't we just jump into it? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to double check these UVs and create a UV snapshot. So first we're going to open up our UV editor right here. Great, and we can get a little small screen. We don't need it to be too big. I'm going to select my model, and you can see I have a pretty good layout, mirrored or overlapping UVs shifting over one unit space from the normal map bake I did. That's still fine. Why don't we create a UV snapshot now? I'm going to zoom in and show you this little icon. You see this little camera right here? That's what we want to click. And you want to make sure your model's selected so it knows what it's taking a snapshot of. And let's set its file path to the desktop. I'm just going to call this UV snapshot. And let's get the same resolution as our normal map. And all the rest of the settings should be just fine. And let's make it a targa. All right. Hit apply and close. And we should have a UV snapshot, something like this. Notice how it's black and white. It doesn't look very user-friendly right now. Whenever we set up our textures inside of Photoshop and Quixel, we'll see how we can get this UV snapshot working for us a little bit better. All right, but that's basically what we need right now, just a targa file, a TGA file of our UV snapshot. So that's perfect. Let's go back into Maya and let's continue. So let's make sure we're in the right units of measurement inside of our Maya project before we even go any further. So let's go to Windows, Settings, and Preferences. And then inside of our preferences, we're going to go all the way down to the Settings section right here. And let's make sure our linear working units is set to meter and hit save. That's going to ensure that we are within the right kind of units of measurement for our conversion into Unity. If you have it at feet or anything else, trust me, you need it in meters because whenever we export it, it's going to be very important that we have the right working units set up inside of Unity, Maya right now. And then I'm going to make sure the size of my mesh is really good. I kind of already contributed to the factor that in real quick, but inside my scene file, I have a little human reference, a little doll mesh here. He looks creepy, I know, but he's at the right size of a human. And if I pull up my game model, you can see that, I had that all in mind. I modeled it from the very beginning at the right size. That little human is going to be tucked away right real nicely in there. So, maybe if you're not quite sure, you can always create like a little cube and 1.7 meters in the Y direction is roughly the size of a human. So you can see, they're roughly the same size. And then, you can make him a little skinny block man. And this will kind of give you a point of reference for how big your meshes should be. And if you want, you can even steal my little man right here for use in future projects for references and stuff. Just export him out on his own. So I got a little stick man here for our reference. I don't need that. Hide my man. And now I know that my mesh is at the correct scale. You really don't want to scale things too much inside of Unity, especially things that are going to have physics components attached to them. Because when you start scaling things with physics and calculations get applied, there's more room for error, like, Bethesda level of physics bugs there going on. So let's try to make sure all of our models at the right scale before Unity. Next, I'm going to make sure that my mesh and my outliner is named correctly. This name right here will show up inside of Unity, so make sure you got a good naming convention in there. You can probably take the suffix out there with the or 001 on it. But I kind of like to make sure I have a suffix of mesh, just to make sure that this isn't the Vic Viper normal map. I know this is the mesh model. All right, so make sure your model is named. Next, we have to consider where we want our pivot point for our model to be inside of Unity. As it stands, Unity has two modes for pivots. It has a pivot and a center point. So when you're on center, then it's at the center of the object. When we turn it to pivot, then it places your transform handles at the imported pivot point. So how do we set that pivot point for Unity? Well, we have to do it inside of Maya. So I want you to look at my model, and why don't we go ahead and change our pivot point to the center pivot of our model. Notice how it's like right in the center of my cockpit. When we do a center mass pivot, since I got this tall fin, it goes somewhere outside of the model. And it just, if you want to do like flips and stuff, it's not going to exactly be center mass of the plane in that instance. So what we need to do is maybe do our own center pivot point. That way, if we're trying to do calculations inside of Unity where we want center mass of my plane, or if we want to do a little bit of animation on it, then you really shouldn't animate on meshes in Unity, but you never know. We want to make sure we have a pivot point that's set up kind of like how I have the pivot point here. Notice how the center of my cockpit is at the center of the grid here. And in case you're wondering, whatever the center grid point is in relation to your model, that's what Unity is going to use for its pivot. All right. So the center inside of Unity is going to look like this, right? When you do a center pivot up here. But since my model is positioned at the origin x000 coordinates inside of Unity right here, then my pivot point in Unity is going to look like this. Let's freeze and reset. And now my pivot point is going to be right in the center. And we kind of get a truer rotation, I think. All right, so make sure you got your pivot point set by placing your object where you want it in relation to the center of the grid. Okay, that's something that gets overlooked quite often in exporting. So we've done a lot of stuff to prepare this model for exportation. Now all it's left to do is actually export it. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our mesh. You want to make sure, even though your mesh may be made of a bunch of different floating objects together, I like to combine them all. Rule of thumb is anything that shares a UV map and is part of the same model, it should be combined. If you have a model that has two different texture maps on it, two different sets of UVs, you probably want to keep those as separate objects and just rebuild it inside of Unity. That way you can apply the materials to this object with those UVs and another material to the other object with UVs, and you don't get a weird UV texture errors that way. But in this case, we made sure that our plane was all on one texture, so we just make sure that everything's combined. I'm not going to be animating anything on here, so one big solid mesh or combined mesh. And then we're going to go to File, Export Selection. We don't need to go to the extra options. Export Selection will be fine. And what we want to do is first we want to just save this to the desktop for right now because we'll move it later. And let's call this Vic Viper game model. All right. And then we want to change its file type to FBX. Perfect. And then we have a few settings to do over here in our export selection menu. So let me zoom in. We're going to go to, where is it? File type specific options. All right. Let me just collapse everything so we can get a fresh start. So if yours is all expanded, just collapse everything down with these little arrows so we're all on the same page. And so after I expand file type specific options, we'll go to advanced options. And we're going to do two things here. First, we're going to go to units. And it's originally going to be checked automatic. Okay, you think, oh, file units converted to meters. Perfect. But trust me, I've tested this. I had to test this out multiple iterations to get exact settings to make sure that anything we export from Maya is in meters. It shows up as meters instead of Unity. So you want to uncheck automatic and set meters to centimeters with a scale factor of 100. I know that sounds ludicrous. Trust me, it's the tried and true way to get our units correct. So let's collapse that. We have one more option we need to fix. We need to go to FBX file format, and this is so we can get our FBX inside of Quixel, and we're going to make sure we're in binary, and it may be stuck at FBX 2018. What we want to do is we want to change it to FBX 2013, just so it plays nice with our texturing tool, Quixel Suite, with Endo and Dedo. All right, with those settings tweaked, we should be good to go. Why don't we just hit Export Selection? And if we minimize, we can see that my Vic Viper game model right here is on my desktop. And now why don't we see how we can import it into Unity. So I have a fresh Unity project up right here. Before I get into any further, let's make sure we're staying tidy with our two exported assets we made with our UV Snapshot and our Vic Viper game model. So I'm going to bring in my project folder that has my Maya project and these two exports. I'm going to get rid of these right now. It's got my original textures and some reference sheet. It's basically what you have. So I'm going to make a new folder and call this exports, just so I have a folder where I can keep my original stuff that I've exported from Maya. So that's going to be my UV Snapshot, my Vic Viper, and I'm going to go into my source images. I'm going to grab this normal map and just put that in exports for right now as well. So this is going to contain everything from my Maya project right here that'll be needed in texturing. So I can go ahead and delete those off my desktop. Perfect. So now why don't we see how we can import our game exported FBX into Unity. So just like I made a folder for my projects inside of the Windows, I'm going to create a folder inside of my projects inside of Unity, and we're going to call this meshes. This is where all my imported meshes are going to live. So let's bring up my Windows folder, and we're just going to drag and drop. So I'm going to go to Exports. I'm just going to drag and drop my FBX onto my meshes folder, and now we see that my game model is in here. You can see the mesh right here in the preview. It shows you a nice wireframe. But we're not done yet. We need to adjust a few import settings for our model. So let's select our game model and let's look over here in our components. All right. Let's see. Import blend shapes. We don't have any blend shapes for this. I think we'll just keep that. All right, so sorry. We'll keep convert units checked, import visibility, no cameras, no lights. Optimize mesh, keep that on. Mesh compression, whenever you mess with this, it can kind of shift your verts in a way. So I very seldomly use these options right here, so I just keep that off. Let's take off generate colliders, read and write enabled. Keep quads, none of this stuff I don't think matters too much. Generate light map UVs. If this was an environment piece, then Unity will create a second set of UVs so it can store your baked lighting information. So if you have a static mesh, like a building or just a prop, you're going to want to generate your light map UVs as well. And I think everything else at this point should be pretty good. So now just hit apply on all your settings and it should be good to go. Why don't we just drag and drop my game model into my hierarchy, and we can see it now inside of our Unity project scene view. It looks really nice. So why don't we see how we can apply our normal map onto here and see how our normals work inside of our game engine. So to get my texture in, just like we created a folder for meshes, let's create one for textures. You don't want to have just a folder for normal maps. Let's just keep it all in the same folder. And maybe your project's really big, then you can break it up a little bit more. So I'm going to take my normal, bake normal, and I think I want to rename it though. Let's rename it to Vic Viper Normal. And it's a TGA right now, so probably not the best file size. So why don't we convert it into a PNG real quick? So let's bring up Photoshop. Let's drag and drop my normal right there on my bar so we can open it up real quick. And we're just going to go to Save As, and let's just create a quick PNG. Perfect. All right, now we have a PNG. And I'm going to get rid of that TGA in my exported folder, and we just need a PNG right now. And I'm going to drag and drop that inside of my textures folder. We have one little tweak to do. We have to go to texture type and set it to normal map. And then we'll hit apply. Everything else should be okay for right now. All right, now that we got my texture inside of my project, let's create a material. So we'll create a new folder, called it material. And then why don't we create a blank material, standard material. We'll call this Vic Viper material. And I'm just going to go to my normal map here. And it'll bring up this selection window we have right here. I'll select my normal map, close that out, and then just drag and drop it onto my mesh. It's really bright, it's really white, so why don't we go in and tweak our albedo color and put it more grayscale like we had it inside of Maya. All right, great. And then I'm just going to completely pull down my metallic slider and my smoothness. All right, perfect. And then we can mess around with our lighting so we can see all those nice details that we have in our baked normal map. And that's how we can get our meshes into Unity and get our normal maps and other maps applied to our meshes. Thank you.